This year, the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 quickly became one of my favourite cameras. It's been everywhere with me, from social events to holidays to capturing BTS on professional shoots.
And there's a few reasons for that, right? So the camera is tiny, it's small, it's compact, which means it's easy to chuck in a bag or a pocket, as the name suggests, but it's also just surprisingly competent. It captures beautiful images. And there's been a lot of hype around this camera, which to begin with, I didn't really believe or buy into, but after using it for nearly 6 months now, I myself can say that this little thing rocks. You can actually capture surprisingly high-end looking images on it. But perhaps most importantly, the camera is actually fun to use. And let's be honest, flipping the screen to turn the camera on absolutely never gets old. In this review, I'm going to share my thoughts on this little camera, how I like to use it, how I like to grade the footage from it, and a few things that I think could be improved on future models. So let's get into it. The 1-inch sensor sits somewhere between, I guess, like a phone sensor and a Micro Four Thirds sensor. In essence, it's big enough to give you some nice dynamic range and sensitivity to light, a little bit of depth of field. And when combined with its 10-bit recording in 4K and its D-logM profile, there's definitely enough room there to push your images around in post and do some interesting things. The lens has an aperture of around f2, I think. The full frame equivalent of the lens focal length is around 20-25. So it is quite wide to work with and shoot with, and you do have to work quite hard if you want to isolate your subject from the background, but it is possible. Maybe the only gripe I have is that there's not the ability to manually control the lens iris. Definitely something I'd like to see in a firmware update. Considering there are like manual and pro modes in this camera, I would hope that it would at least offer this kind of feature with, it gives the ability to control shutter speed and ISO, why not aperture. The DJI Osmo Pocket 3 comes with a pretty decent touchscreen, but even as someone with pretty small, spindly, bony fingers, even I struggle to adjust some of the settings sometimes, which can become a bit sort of a faff when you're in a hurry and you want to quickly change settings. So can't imagine what it must be like for someone with giant sausage fingers. To turn the camera on, you obviously just flip the little screen out and it boots up pretty much instantly in a few seconds. And I think honestly this is a bit of a masterstroke from DJI because the action in itself is incredibly tactile. With this user interface as well, it makes it really easy to swap between shooting in sort of 16:9 and a vertical 9:16 by flipping the screen. However, shooting in vertical mode does reduce the resolution. You're not getting a 4K image, so I have actually seen some people literally just rotate the camera sideways in order to shoot vertical and still capture in 4K. You get a bunch of picture profiles to choose between. You get standard, hyperlog gamma, and D-logM. I honestly almost exclusively just shoot in D-logM. It gives you the most control over your image. Although it's not a proper log profile, it does give you enough flexibility and the sort of room and headroom you need to create really stunning images. You can go super slick and minimal and clean, or more towards the area that I like, which is pushing a more filmic image that's a bit grungier, a bit more organic. So playing around with color density and stuff like that, and the image doesn't fall apart when you really increase those rich, deep colors. And the end result is, as long as you've exposed it properly in the first place, you can pull really high-end looking images out of this camera that look like you've shot it on a camera 10 times the size and price. I find that the standard picture profile is just a bit, it's over sharpened, it's too vibrant, it just looks too digital, and it's closer to something that you should shot on your phone. And then when you get it in post, there's a bit more baked in and there's not much you can do in terms of pushing stuff around. If you want to see my top tips for how I set the camera up and what settings and profiles and stuff that I use with the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, then there is a separate video. It'll be linked somewhere here in the description down below. I recommend watching that if you like the look of the footage that I'm shooting and featured in this review. So those of you who follow this channel will obviously have seen Palermo, which is a LUT pack and Powergrade that I've developed for D-logM and specifically for the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. You can buy it on my store. And the intention with using this is that it will hopefully help you get footage that looks like it's from a much more expensive camera. And I was also really chuffed that Philip Bloom also decided that it was good enough to share on his Facebook page. And now that I've developed that, it just makes it so much easier just to sort of, you know, capture some footage, bring it into Resolve or Final Cut, slap the LUT on, and then export it and share it to social media or wherever I want to post it. So I really recommend checking that out if you like the look of the image in this review. It's available as a LUT pack, or if you work in Resolve, you can buy it as a Powergrade. It just gives you a little bit more flexibility. And I've designed it so it's, you know, usable by beginners, but also more pro users who want the flexibility of a Powergrade. I often get D-logM images back and, you know, get them full screen on my MacBook, and I'm just like, how did this image come out of this tiny little camera? You know, it reminds me of images that I pull back professionally from my Lumix cameras. It's bright, it's clean, it's detailed, and it's just remarkable that this tiny little thing could produce an image that looks that good. Protecting your highlights on this camera and preventing them from clipping because it doesn't have the most dynamic range is a really great way of getting quite nice, classy looking images. The moment you clip those highlights, it does tend to sort of look a little bit cheaper, sort of gives the game away a little bit.
It's not a low light camera, so the maximum I would want to push this sensor is around ISO 1600. After that, noise becomes a bit of an issue.
I always shoot with the camera in manual mode and pro mode. I always make sure my shutter is twice that of my frame rate. And with ISO, you can either dial it in with a set number, or you can give it a range to move between. The great thing about that is then it allows you just to have a bit more flexibility when the exposure might be changing and you're moving around, because then the camera can sort of change the ISO. I have found when shooting in higher frame rates, when it does begin to change the ISO, it does appear to have a more of a stepped appearance, slight sort of jump between the ISO levels. Doesn't look great, looks a bit distracting. So I think if you were shooting in 50 frames or above, I'd recommend maybe just setting your ISO.
Skin tones also just look surprisingly natural and organic out of this camera. There are some limitations in low or mixed lighting. The camera doesn't really deal with skin tones very well, as you might expect from a smaller sensor. And I've tend to found that skin tones can take on a bit of a waxy, lifeless look to them. Something that shooting on a larger sensor on a more expensive camera would be more forgiving with. And I think that's just the main thing that you need to manage when you're working with the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. There is a sort of sweet spot, a Goldilocks zone, in which everything looks fantastic. But if you underexpose it or overexpose it, that's where the camera's not going to be able to keep up with you. If you are trying to squeeze a cinematic image out of this camera, it is going to make you work for it. So that's going to mean locking your shutter speed, managing the ISO, and then using ND filters. And that can get fiddly when you're swapping ND filters on and off when stuff's happening in front of you and you want to get on with the job of recording it. But if you're willing to manage all that, you can get some stunning images out of this camera.
It took me a while to access the slow motion features of this camera, and that's mainly because they are buried away in a different shooting mode, which I think a lot of people may miss out on if they just stick it in the standard shooting mode. But also because I just assume that 120 frames on a little camera like this in 4K, it would just look awful and it would suck, but it doesn't. There doesn't seem to be any penalty or cost. You don't have to shoot in 8-bit, you don't have to shoot in a standard picture profile. You can still shoot in 4K, in D-logM, and footage that you pull off this is comparable to shooting in the normal shooting mode.
So DJI Osmo has a great active track feature. So if we just spin this around, you can see that there. So all you have to do to engage the active track is super quick and simple. You just double click on an object like my face, it'll turn green, and then it's basically locked in, and as you can see, the camera is now tracking me. And it's doing a pretty good job of that. Even if I leave frame, it'll still remember me. So if I just go like that, and back, you can see it's still got me, it remembers me, and it's still tracking me. So this function is really powerful, it's really simple to use. You can power the camera up, quickly double tap on something to keep the camera tracking. Now it does have A very, very minor delay, a little bit of lag, as you can see as I'm moving quickly. I think you can probably fix this a little bit by increasing the gimbal speed, but even then I found that there is a slight perceivable lag in the tracking between movement of subject and the following of the camera. It's not the end of the world, but it's just enough to notice it. So in addition to that, the camera also has face tracking. So we just engage it here. You have to go into the side menu, start, and you'll see the face has to sort of enter this sort of little box. And then once it's detected the face, again, you get a competent sort of face only tracking. And again, it's pretty good. I can leave shot and then I can enter it again and it will still have me. Honestly, I don't use this feature that often. I tend to just use the active track, the double tap to track mode, just because it's a lot quicker. You can power it up, quickly double tap on the screen. It's very intuitive, rather than sort of going into menus, having to line a face up in the little box and then get tracking. But if you are vlogging, I think, you know, the face track is probably the better one to use. And it just also means you've got the confidence that the camera is going to have you in frame even when you're not looking at the screen or the monitor. And it means it just frees you up and frees your attention up to do other things whilst you're vlogging or recording yourself. There are also two pretty cool rotation modes. I think there's a 90 degree and 180 degree. Don't really use the 90 degree much, but creatively I have used the 180 quite a lot. It's quite cool. And you can see a few examples of it here. Great for pointing the camera straight up in the sky and getting some nice sort of rotational building shots or cityscape. Just getting some interesting, fun shots. You can also fine-tune all the gimbal settings to get them how you like. Out of the box, it does feel a little bit twitchy, so me personally, I just turned down the sensitivity and the movement speed of the gimbal. It also has several different gimbal behaviors that you can choose between. Double tapping the joystick will always recenter the gimbal. That's a great feature. You know, you find it on DJI's larger gimbals as well. The gimbal itself, I have found over the time that I've had this camera, it can occasionally become misaligned. It is thankfully a calibration mode, so you just set the gimbal down on a flat surface and then you run it through the calibration and it realigns everything. I've only had to do that twice, probably over a 6-month period, which, you know, is good. When it comes to cameras and apps, there are only really two brands I really rate at the moment when it comes to getting this right. One is Red with their incredible Red Control app, and I've spoken a lot about that on this channel. But the other is DJI. Both these two brands understand that smartphones and tablets are a modern part of most production workflows now, and that often controlling your camera via phone is more convenient than on a tiny touchscreen or via buttons on a camera. And so it's really refreshing and awesome to see that DJI have implemented a strong app, and the fact that it kind of extends functionality of this camera and makes the camera even more useful than it would be as this sort of tiny little fun thing. Like, DJI could easily have just left it at creating a nice, fun, capable camera, but they've put the legwork in and made a really useful app as well. So I've used the Osmo 3 to shoot talking head videos for YouTube, and I can monitor the shot on my phone. I don't need an additional monitor. I can trigger record using that. I have used it to get overhead shots for product shots whilst I'm rigging cameras in some of my previous videos. You know, so I can easily boom in my Osmo Pocket 3 above me and then, you know, just use the app to monitor my shot, zoom in, pull focus, hit record. Relative to my Lumix S5 IIX, which is what we're using now to record this vlog, it takes about 20 minutes to set up. I need a tripod, the auto cue we have there, we've got a monitor, we've got the audio solution, camera, batteries, blah, 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 magic arm. It's not a quick and simple setup. It takes up a lot of room, and you know, if I'm traveling or anything, I can't bring all this kit with me. But the benefit of using this little DJI Osmo is that, you know, you can have the full production kit in the tiny Creator Combo pouch, and it can pretty much travel everywhere. With the Creator Combo, you also get a DJI wireless mic Mark II. This is why I would go for the combo kit. It just pairs seamlessly with the camera. It syncs in seconds. Then you have a professional 32-bit flow audio recording workflow that you can use and be set up and ready to go in a matter of minutes. And then you can just really easily record yourself and monitor your image on the screen. And there's a little icon in the bottom right of the screen, and if you press that, it will just flip the camera around so it's in selfie mode.
So for anyone who records themselves a lot, this is an incredibly time efficient setup without too many caveats or compromises in terms of quality. So if I did have to highlight a few things that I think were missing or lacking on this camera, I think the first would be the inability to change the lens aperture. It's not a big deal, but given that it is such a wide angle lens, and given that we've already got shutter speed, ISO, 10-bit D-log, it just seems like it would make sense to have that in the bag as well. The other obvious limitation with this camera is the fact that it's a fixed lens and it's a very wide lens. Yes, the camera has a digital zoom, it's not very good, it doesn't look great. So if there was some way to introduce, I don't know, an optical zoom or some sort of clever interchangeable gimbal head with a wide lens and a tight lens, that would be really cool. And then the final one, I think, is just smoothing out the additional axis of movement for this camera. Although we have a built-in gimbal here and does a great job of giving cinematic motion, you are liable to get these sort of micro movements and jitters and side-to-side movements that really do just give the game away that you're using a small, cheaper camera. Whether some additional software stabilization could work, or whether it's an external accessory that the camera body itself clips into and it just provides that extra layer of stabilization. That would be really cool. I don't know what the solution is, but if a company can solve it, it's going to be DJI. So using this camera has brought me a lot of joy on my various holidays and trips, and even when I'm just out and about in London. And it has eventually persuaded me to leave my much bigger and more competent cameras at home. And with the right settings and the right grade, it's more than capable of capturing beautiful images. If you're a travel vlogger, content creator, YouTuber, filmmaker who just wants to capture BTS on set, or anyone who wants to bring people behind the scenes, this is a really powerful camera. It can wear many hats, it can do many things, and it feels like one of those next-gen pieces of technology. It doesn't feel iterative, it feels transformative, it feels disruptive. So yeah, believe the hype, this little thing is ace. I don't regret spending money on it. If anything, I'm using this more than I was when I first picked it up, and I think that is a good sign. I'd love to know what you think of this in the comments down below. How many of you have picked up one of these? Are you thinking of picking one up? Is there anything that's stopping you from picking one up? Is there anyone out there who picked one up and regretted it? Let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to know how you're all getting on with this. If you have watched this video and are thinking about purchasing one, again, please use my affiliate links in the description. It doesn't cost you anything, but I do make a small commission. But yeah, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.